You're listening to Staged Right, the podcast edition. Our story starts here, in Stratford, Ontario, a sleepy town about 2 hours outside of Toronto, depending on the traffic, that is home to the Stratford Festival, widely regarded as the largest classical repertory theatre company in North America. Founded in 1953, some of the greatest actors of the English language have performed here. Well-known names like Christopher Plummer and Maggie Smith spent time at the festival. Even William Shatner, who before making a name on Star Trek, spent 3 seasons at Stratford performing Shakespeare. As well as Shakespeare, the Stratford Festival is known for its lavish musical productions, and Bruce Dow has often been front and center in many of them. For those who were my age, coming up as a young aspiring performer, Bruce Dow's name was synonymous with Stratford, an actor that one critic called a national treasure, celebrated for his starring roles in shows like Cabaret, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and Jesus Christ Superstar.
So, you are the Christ, you're the great Jesus Christ. Prove to me that you're divine. Change my water into wine. That's all you need.
Then, suddenly, Bruce Dow wasn't at the Stratford Festival. Audiences who came back year after year sat in their seats, flipped through their programs, and noticed that his name wasn't in the company list anymore. And he didn't return the following year either. For some, it was like he just disappeared. Where did he go, and why did he leave? Bruce Dow, the actor that was once regarded as a national treasure, is living a very different life now on the East Coast, and I recently had the chance to speak with him over Zoom.
You caught me on a weird day. You're getting the very unedited version.
Yeah. Bruce has always seemed to me like a big giant teddy bear. Whenever we talk, he always makes sure to ask me if I'm well and happy. When we talk about show business, he becomes very serious. Not so much about the art or the craft of it all, but the other side of it, the veneer of it all. And after 38 years in the business, he had some very blunt things to say. I wanted to know how he got his start, what play or musical he saw that made him decide he wanted to be an actor, and his answer tickled me.
Yvonne Craig, who was Batgirl.
Gotham City Library, Miss Gordon speaking.
And I thought she was pretty and smart and witty, and she had the little flip in her hair, and she wore little 1.5-inch kitten heels, and she would boom, boom, and kick the bad guys. I thought that was the coolest thing in the world, and I just wanted to be her. So, and then my mom explained to me, well, it's not really Batman, it's a person pretending to be Batman, and that's what he does. And I went, that's the coolest thing in the world, that's what I want to do. I want to pretend to be somebody who isn't me.
Holy vanity case! What a time to powder her nose.
Correction, Boy Wonder. It's my electronic Batgirl compact with a laser beam, which will destroy anything.
No, it was funny. In the Stratford years, you hear, I first saw William Hutt on stage and I knew I wanted to be an actor. Okay, great. That's your story. Mine was not so highfalutin. Mine was the TV series Batman, because that's what I had access to.
Bruce was born in Seattle, the son of an American father and Canadian mother. In 1966, his father, a man Bruce described as controlling and prone to rash decisions, decided to leave not just Seattle, but the United States, moving the entire family to Vancouver, British Columbia.
When I became a Canadian citizen at age 12, you were supposed there was no such thing as having a dual citizenship. So you were supposed to renounce your U.S. citizenship, but because I was a minor, I didn't renounce it. Then when I was in my 20s, I went, oh, so I'm still a U.S. citizen, and I applied and got my passport and and it was much less problematic to do that than it is now. So I've always had both. I was trying to get my parents to get me into performing as a child. Like I wanted to do film and TV as a kid. And do stage shows, and they were just, no, you can do shows at school. And then I was going to go to university, because that's what our family did. You always went to university.
Enrolling at the University of British Columbia, Bruce studied acting in their BFA program.
It was a really great program. It was the same school that Brent Carver went to, but he had gone a few years before. Richard Azunian had been a student there. It was a really good acting program, and I really loved it, but at the end of it, I didn't want to be an actor. We always did summer stock, and it was a great experience. We got to pick our own shows, hire the directors. It was a small, intimate playing space, and we did them back to back. And while you were performing the one, you were rehearsing the next one. It was boom, boom, boom. Really great training experience. But I worked with one student actor who would come off after every scene and go, "Oh, I was just so in the moment. I was right there. I was really present. I was feeling it. It was really real." Or he'd come off and go, "I wasn't feeling it. I wasn't real. It was just like, I couldn't stick my head that far up my ass." And I don't want to diminish it, and it's not fair of me now to diminish this young man's experience of his work. But it sure didn't make me want to do it more. And it didn't feel right. It felt incredibly self-indulgent.
After graduating from UCB's acting program, he went back to study technical theater, studying behind the scenes in stage management, lighting, and costume design, eventually earning an MFA in directing with a minor in theater history. Keep in mind that Bruce was telling himself all the while that he didn't want to be an actor anymore. That is until his final year of school, when it was announced that Les Miserables, the hit new musical selling out around the world, would launch a brand new production in Toronto in March of 1989. After auditioning in Vancouver, Bruce was cast as a swing in the original Canadian company of Les Miserables.
And I thought, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to learn all these different parts, and I'll really learn how the show is staged, and we'll be working with the folks from the Royal Shakespeare Company, so won't that be amazing? Only to move to Toronto and find out that we were being directed by basically Cameron Mackintosh's ex-boyfriend, who was a failed hairdresser turned failed stage manager turned resident director for Les Mis worldwide. And he was an absolute nightmare. Just the height of 80s toxicity in theater, demeaning to actors, cruel to actors, no real direction, because he didn't know anything about directing. It was disappointing in rehearsals to see all of that talent so misused. It was very cookie cutter direction. You stand this way, you hold your hands that way, your tone has to be like this, and we need you to do that. But there was no creative involvement whatsoever. And then for the run of the show was simply the brutal logistics of it, that it was, 26 costume changes per person in Act 1 alone. And we'd never done anything like that. Well, nobody had ever really done anything like that before, and they certainly had never done anything like that in Canada before. I'm sure the emotionality of Les Mis also contributed to the kind of experience I had with it too. And to hear the audience reaction was wonderful. But it was also 3.25 hours long every night.
After finishing with the Toronto run of Les Mis, Bruce decided to quit the business and leave Toronto to lead an acting program out west. That teaching stint, however, was short-lived, saying it was a nightmare. And just as quickly as he left, he returned to Southern Ontario to perform with shows at the Stratford Festival and eventually the Canadian company of Beauty and the Beast in Toronto. But even with this enviable success, Bruce still found himself pulled in other directions.
And when I wasn't on stage, I was looking at law schools. I was looking at other things to do. I was doing a show 8 times a week. That wasn't what I wanted to be doing, but I got work, and it was good work, and it was fun work. But I don't know, I kept having this push me, pull you thing with it.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that when a Canadian actor makes their Broadway debut, their status in our industry is elevated. And in the year 2000, that happened to Bruce when he was cast in the Broadway musical production of Jane Eyre. For countless, Broadway is the pinnacle, the place we all aspire to work. But the dream of working on Broadway is often at odds with the reality of working on Broadway.
Broadway is so glamorous. Broadway is not glamorous. It's in a rather dirty, overrun part of town. The fronts of the theaters are well maintained because that's where the audiences are. Backstages are usually a nightmare and a mess and unkept because they're rental houses. You're in a dressing room, 7x9 dressing room with 6 other men changing. It's not glamorous, but it's the glamour of Broadway. And it was a blast. I'm not going to diminish that experience because who gets to have that?
After Jane Eyre, Bruce joined as a replacement in the Broadway revival of The Music Man running at the time, and in 2002, he appeared at the Lincoln Center for a benefit performance of Anything Goes featuring cast members of the 1987 revival, including Patti LuPone. A note that this conversation happened before the release of the now infamous New Yorker article.
There's a great, one of my favorite theater moments. Miss Patti LuPone sang Blow Gabriel Blow, kicked the shit out of it. The trumpeter kicked the shit out of it. And she finished the number, we all finished the number, and the dancers were panting on the stage. But the audience didn't stand up. And so Miss LuPone paused and she went, "Let's do it again. Come on, kids, can we do it again?" And she turned out, and the trumpeter looked like he was going to have a heart attack. His face was bright red. And she did it again. And she got the audience to their feet. And you could just see her go, "Okay, I've done it." It was two days, 3 performances, something like that. And that was, I think it was, well, it probably was the last performance. And she was like, if this is going to be the last time I sing this song, this is how I want it to end. And she made that happen. And it was just wild. That kind of balls on stage. Just amazing. Yeah.
Wow. It's scary to fuck with sometimes.
Oh, totally. Oh, totally. Yeah, she was always nothing but charming. She'd sort of stroll in like 10, 15 minutes late, and they were staging one number, and it was a different director than the original production. And it was a concert-ish version with dances. But he staged the end of one number, and she went, "No, I'm going to do the turn and the wink as I did in the original production." And he went, "Great, Miss LuPone, that's fabulous." And so they did that. It's funny. I mean, you sort of hinting at it, dodging around it. Actors who have tempers. I've worked with a number of big actors, many of whom did not have a temper. Christopher Plummer was renowned for having a temper. I only saw him lose his temper when other people weren't doing their job. I only saw him when he was like, "I'm ready to go and do this, and I'm 80-something years old. Can we do this, please? What are we? Oh, we're waiting for that because you didn't do your job." Well, that's not good enough. And he would then express him. But otherwise, he was a complete sweetheart.
Now back in Canada, Bruce returned to the Stratford Festival, performing in big stage musicals, as well as Shakespearean works through many seasons. It was this period, as a young, aspiring theater student, that I first got to know the name Bruce Dow, who, after starring in a string of shows, became one of the festival's leading names.
Man of La Mancha, one of the first big musicals they'd done on the festival stage, was just transformative. Into the Woods was amazing. Cabaret was amazing. There were so many. I did actually have fun during my career. I don't want it to sound like I didn't, but there was a lot of great creative stuff that was both functional and creative. And I think that's what interests me most about live theater is that certain things have to happen. You have to get down left so that you're standing in the light. I get that. That's cool. Creatively, how do I do that? Or how do I create that moment so that they want to light it that way? It takes me back to that guy in Summerstock. You're doing a Summerstock show, but his work was so important. Yeah, work can be important. It can also be enlightening. It can be educational. It can be fun. It can be crap. But this pretension of everything has to be deep and meaningful. I mean, it is by its very nature. You are telling a story in front of people. That very act is deep and meaningful. But who are you telling someone else's work isn't good enough or isn't?
In 2011, Bruce was cast as King Herod in Stratford's production of Jesus Christ Superstar. Helmed by then artistic director Des McAnuff, the show received glowing reviews in the Canadian press, becoming a sellout at the festival, and quiet buzz began about a Broadway transfer. When Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice made their own respective visits to see the production in Stratford, that buzz intensified, and by the end of its run, Superstar was scheduled to make a Broadway bow in March of 2012. Bruce, along with many in its cast, followed the show to New York. But whereas Canadian audiences went positively feral over this production, New York critics and audiences were not as receptive. Despite Tony nominations and a performance at the ceremony, Jesus Christ Superstar ultimately closed on July 1st, 2012. Some from that cast eventually returned to Stratford for its 2013 season, but Bruce was notably not one of them. Listening back to our conversation, I sort of talked around the subject and his decision not to return to the festival. I know some, including myself at the time, who would have been shocked at turning down the chance to return to a company where you are well established and your work is celebrated. But the end of a relationship, and perhaps a need for a change of scene, may have been reason enough for Bruce not to return.
I had a real crisis with that identity thing. Who am I if I'm not Bruce Dow, the Stratford actor? I never thought I believed that until I wasn't going to be it anymore. And I thought it was the only reason people liked me, or that's what the voice was telling me at the time. Well, if you let that go, you're going to disappear. And I came back and I kind of was living below the poverty line, but getting a Dora nomination every 2 years, Or I'd go to Washington and do a show at the Shakespeare Theatre Company there and get a nomination for something, But I wasn't working. I wasn't a working actor. I was somebody who would work twice a year. I was living on RRSPs, thinking, I can't get a real job. I can't get a job to pay my way because what if acting work comes along? That's not how it works. The Stratford Festival does a very good job of selling itself as a commodity and selling its actors as a commodity. And there are wonderful actors at Stratford. There are wonderful actors everywhere. You might have heard of me as Stratford's Bruce Dow because the proximity to Toronto. Nobody in Edmonton had heard of me or would give a rat's ass unless they were in the theater and had gone to Stratford and had seen something. It's an illusion. Martha Henry, a brilliant actor, idolized in the Stratford sphere of stars. 98.99999999932% of Canadians have never heard of her or have any reference to her. That doesn't diminish her work or her value, but because we have a smaller population, we have to uplift those of us who are working, but again, problematic when you buy into it.
It was shortly after this period, maybe 10 years ago, that I first got to know Bruce, not as an actor, but as a friend, and eventually a mentor. I remember initially being stunned by how blunt he was in his way of talking about the industry. I actually came to find it weirdly refreshing, a stark contrast to the airy, patronizing platitudes I was starting to grow wary of. Bruce was also very good about checking in on me to see if I was okay, not just seeing if I was working or getting auditions, but other things, simple things, real things, like if I was eating well or paying my rent, seeing if I was happy, living a life that had nothing to do with show business.
I've always been aware this is although I wasn't aware of it for myself, on some levels, how problematic this business is. There's a bit of a problematic thing. Well, nobody's been nice to me. Well, it takes very little effort for you to be what you are missing to someone else. Rather than going, well, nobody's been nice to me, so screw everybody else. That's what we're doing right now. Oh, are you able to show up for me? Yeah. Can you show up for me? If I had a acutely problematic father, toxic masculinity all over the place, raging narcissist, fascinating, funny, creative man who also I knew loved me in his own way as much as he possibly could. I wouldn't have missed the experience of him for the world, although it was a nightmare. But what can I do? I'm not trying to be anybody's father, but I can be an adult relationship for somebody I can model a healthy relationship with somebody else. Not saying I'm problem free, none of us are. But on the whole, you'll get less of the problems from me than you would from, say, my father.
Through all of this, Bruce still continued to perform on stage, and in 2019, he was cast in Diana, a musical that follows the rapid rise of the former Princess of Wales, all set to David Bryan's frenetic pop score. The musical, of course, would eventually become renowned for its campiness, its dedicated fan base, and largely negative critical reception. But when speaking of his time with the musical, Bruce has nothing but good things to say.
That was one of the best groups of people I ever worked with. They were so much fun. They were so supportive, so creative, really trying to make the best thing they could for this. And live audiences loved it. They got the sort of campy, fun sense of it. I get why it got the bad reviews it did, for sure. But still, it was a great experience. I absolutely loved it. And that's something we don't allow ourselves in theater, to go, you know what? That shit was terrible, but I had a blast.
Your palace staff awaits. For safety's sake, let's lock you away. A fairy tale for the night.
Diana previewed in San Diego in the spring of 2019, and eventually began performances on Broadway a year later, in March of 2020.
We were in final tech rehearsals and previews, and they sat us down and said, we're shutting down for 2 weeks. So I flew back to Toronto, and thank God for my friend Stephen, who let me stay in his apartment. And I slept on a cot in his living room. When his other roommate got home, there were three grown-ass men in a small 2-bedroom apartment. And we were drinking and washing our vegetables and drinking and watching movies and drinking.
It's strange thinking back to those early days of COVID. It really wasn't that long ago, but in some ways it feels like a lifetime. Along with hope and faith that theaters would one day open again, I know for a lot of us there was also a pervading fear that maybe none of it would come back. Performers by their very nature are used to the idea of pivoting in a career, and everyone navigated the pandemic in different ways.
I had been dating this guy for a while who was doing this weird intercultural psychotherapy and multi-phase psychospiritual care, a master's of psychospiritual studies at University of Toronto. Anyway, he was doing this weird degree, and I went, well, I've had a therapist forever. This sounds slightly different. I can sit on this sofa during the pandemic and drink, or I can maybe go to school and learn something interesting, whether I end up doing it or not. Why don't I start that? And I asked him, I said, honey, would you mind if I took the same degree? And he went, no, if you want to do it, do it. It's a program that leads you either to hospital chaplaincy, and I'm not in that faith world, or to psychotherapy that has a spiritual component to it. I have my own religious wound, and I'm interested in exploring theological questions. Not that I have any spiritual agenda, but if you have an experience of faith, we can work with that in your mental health. This happens I'm speaking specifically of religious wounds, for queer kids who grow up in religious environments, and then they find out that God doesn't love them anymore, and I hate the church, or I hate the mosque, and I can never go. I'll never go to temple again. But I miss that connection with God. I can miss that connection with something greater than myself.
At the end of the summer of 2020, still in the thick of the pandemic, Bruce got a call from the producers of Diana about filming the show for Netflix.
Our producers were amazing. It's Beth Williams and Broadway Across America and Frank Marshall, who produced all the Indiana Jones movies. And we had the cream of the crop on this as producers. And a whole bunch of other people. Don't want to leave them out, but too many to list. Anyway, they went, okay, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but we want to get this recorded. And hey, they've just filmed Hamilton. Why don't we do a pro shot of Diana? And Frank Marshall sold it to Netflix, and Netflix bought it. And so we had the same cinematographer as Hamilton. They flew us down to New Jersey, where we lived in a COVID bubble. We got there, and for 4 days, everybody stayed in their room and they brought us our meals. And then they would test us every day. And if you had a fever or didn't feel right, you were out for 72 hours. And they re-rehearsed and did rewrites and things on the show. And then they picked us all up and moved us into Manhattan in a hotel. It was a ghost town. Manhattan was just a ghost town. But we walked as a pod. This is pre-vaccine, so there's nobody's vaccinated. They walked us to the theater. We went to the theater. They torn out all the seats. There were 9 cameras in the theater. And we slowly began shooting the show. And it was amazing. And then we flew back to our little homes, and I flew back and took over my best friend's room in his apartment because it had the ensuite bathroom, and I stayed there for 2 weeks till I was sure that I was clear because there were no vaccines. It was like, hold your breath and run in and hide from the other two.
In the road to reopening, Governor Cuomo just announced that Broadway shows will open September 14th and tickets will go on sale tomorrow at 100% capacity. Eyewitnesses.
In the spring of 2021, the Broadway League began the mammoth undertaking of reviving the New York theater scene. Diana was scheduled to reopen in December, just after the show's October release on Netflix, and the entire original cast was invited back.
And I booked an apartment and I booked flights to go down, and literally the day or two before, something inside me just went no. And I'm not really sure what that voice was, but the logic part of it was I'd done it. I didn't need to go back to the crowded dressing room. I didn't need to go back to the cramped backstage. I'd had the experience. Was I just too tired? Maybe. It was going to be on Netflix. Do I need to open the show? And maybe partly that was true. I had a real I didn't have a mental crisis. The whole system, my body just said, no, I'm not going. And it was so weird. Just the whole system shut down and went, no, not going. Just didn't need to do it. Didn't want to do it.
For many of us, the pandemic was a chance to reevaluate one's priorities, one's values, and a lot happened during that time. Before being invited back to Diana, Bruce and his partner got married, and a job opportunity on the East Coast changed both their lives.
My husband interviewed for a job out here. He finished his degree in psychospiritual studies and then said, I want to be a minister. He's a person of deep faith. I don't know what a calling is, but if there is one, he has it. So he did his Master's of Divinity to become a Presbyterian minister.
Oh, and that weird degree that Bruce took during the pandemic? Well, he finished that too.
I am now a registered psychotherapist with the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario. I am now a registered counseling therapist with the Nova Scotia College of Counseling Therapists. And I'm in the process of getting my certification with the Canadian Association for Spiritual Therapy. My job is to be present when they need me to be present. It's a very different concept. When they want to show up for themselves for the work, if I agree to be there for them, then that is what I am there for. And that is my job, to offer a compassionate, non-judgmental, non-agended space to explore your experience.
Even though I've known Bruce as a friend for years now, I sometimes think about the theater kid version of myself, the one who saw him on stage in all those shows at Stratford, and thinking how someone like that could just leave all of it behind. Now older, and with a bit of my own experience behind me, I think of it less as quitting the business and more of a natural progression of things. Only near the end of our conversation, talking about all these life changes, I suddenly noticed the piano that's been behind him the entire time.
I went out and bought this little puppy because my old one died. And the idea initially was I would like to play piano and maybe take piano lessons just for the sake of playing piano. Of course, an idea for writing a show has come up, and so that's burbling along. There's a couple of shows in development, but we'll see where they go. I can still be an actor and be a psychotherapist because I'm a person who does both.
The longer I navigate being in the business, I sometimes think about how much I wish I'd known getting into it. Would I have been more successful then? Would I have been scared off? Turn tail and run? I can't really be sure. One of the things that I've always appreciated about Bruce is his honesty in talking about these things. And for the new crop of performers coming up now, perhaps those who've been around and need that extra push, I asked him what he might tell them.
Well, it's hard because I don't want to be the voice that comes in and goes, you're going to be out of work most of the time. If you want to be a star, don't do it. The message is work on being a person. Wanting to be creative and aspirational and live your creative self on the stage, that's at the top of the pyramid. That doesn't exist if you don't have food, shelter, housing, friends, a relationship with your family, good, bad, indifferent, your chosen family, whatever it is. If you're only hanging out with other actors talking about acting, you're a microcosm that's imploding on itself. You are the fruit flies in the jar. What we're talking about is values. There's a whole big world out there that does not give a shit about what you do creatively. That's what you need to pay attention to, because that's the world you're reflecting in your art. So it works both ways. You have to be a part of the world and be a person who writes, who acts, who composes, who does a lot of things. The world is so much more complex than we want to give it credit because complexity is scary. Not knowing is scary. Everything is fundamentally underwritten by a fear of death, that I'm going to disappear, that I will cease to exist. Well, guess what? We all cease to exist. So, and what am I doing in the meantime?
Thank you for listening to this episode of Staged Right, the podcast edition, and a very special thank you to Bruce Dow for speaking with me. Don't forget to give this podcast a rating, it helps it be discovered. And don't forget to check out video episodes of Staged Right on YouTube. If you want to share your support in a flexible, affordable way, you can make a one-time contribution for as much or as little as you want via Ko-fi, or become a monthly supporter via Patreon for as little as $5 a month. You can find links in the description. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more.